Hello out there, you wonderful people. This is Andre, the Game Idea Guy. Thank you once again for lending me your time and your ear listening into another Gamer's Thoughts discussion. And this time I'm going to be talking about something that Mighty keeps saying. And for as much as I like the brother, this was not the statement that should have been made. And there was one saying he wished that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was on PS5 because it would just be better. I think I've made a point about that a while ago. But that aside, he also said that Sony is the home for JRPGs, and that's not necessarily been a true statement for a while now. Now, I'm not even worried about the secondary statement because we all know that that's not a true statement. The first statement, however, that he wishes that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was on the PS5. I mean, I have no qualms with him wishing that. But I do have a problem with the thought process that it would just automatically be better on the PS5. I don't know if people really get this or not. But if a game is developed for a specific console and you port that game to another console without fixing or editing the code, it's not going to work the way you think it does. Prime example is one of my favorite games that Konami has ever released. And it's a favorite among a lot of people. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, if you are a console connoisseur of any kind, and you've played both the PlayStation iteration of that game and the Sega Saturn iteration of that game, you will know what I'm saying to be true right now. And that is that the Sony version of that game ran better because it was built specifically for the PS1, or the PSX as it was known back then, PlayStation. It ran better on that machine because it was basically specifically built around how that console did games. Literally, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a game running in 3D with a 2D perspective. A lot of people don't know that, but that's exactly what it is. It's a game running. It's a 3D game running in a 2D perspective, and it looks 2D. Actually, that's how Sony did a lot of their 2D games, or how a lot of games were run in 2D on the PlayStation. Not all of them, but a lot. But that's aside from the point. Now, if you knew anything about those consoles back then, the Sega Saturn was the superior console when it came down to specs, everything. It was superior to the PlayStation. There's no two ways about that. It was massively superior to the PlayStation outside of a few factors. So, when that game got ported from the PS1 to the Saturn with a very small team, mind you, a lot of things could not be done on the Saturn because of the rush to move that game over. There was very little edited in the code when it was ported to the Saturn. That's why it remained a Japanese exclusive for the Sega Saturn. It didn't get much traction, so it never got moved from Saturn in Japan to the USA. That and certain heads in Sega back then kind of shitting on their own product. But that's a different story. So in that case, there was some editing done, but it was so minimal. It really didn't help that game at all. And I do apologize for all the noise of the cars flying by me. That's the scenario that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 would be in, being ported directly from the Switch over to the PS5. The PS5 is not going to run the game any differently than the Switch would if nothing is changed. Now, somebody's going to say, well, Andre, obviously they would have to, people would understand it. No, not everybody understands that. There are plenty of people who believe just because you have better hardware, that means something is automatically going to work better. That's not how it goes. They literally have to reprogram that game around the specifications of the PS5 or the PS4 in order for it to work well. Not saying it can't be done. I'm saying that Nintendo and Monolith Soft would look at that and be like, that's not worth the expense for us when we went through all of the trouble and spent all the money we did to make this game. So we're not going to go ahead and potentially spend double what we spent putting this game together to put it on another platform and get back not even half of what we spent to produce it. Because chances are, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 would go to PlayStation to die. It would not do well on that platform. Yeah, there would be some hardcore JRPG heads that'll purchase it, but it will not do well on that platform. PS5 isn't even doing well in Japan. That should show you a problem. Because Sony almost always does well in Japan. This is the first time they have not done well in Japan. That's something to consider. And if they're not doing well in Japan, do you really think that a bunch of JRPGs are going to do well on that platform? Probably not. Now, PS4, on the other hand, maybe. It may do well on PS4. But then again, it's so late in the life of the PS4, it might not. It might just not. Then again, Sony's having trouble getting PS5s out into people's hands. So it could go either way. But right now, that's not worth the expense to Nintendo. Sure, they could spend the time reworking the code and everything, which again would cost potentially double what they already spent to produce the game because of all of the extra work that will go into reprogramming it. That's why Xenoblade Chronicles X has yet to be converted to the Switch, because it would cost too much money for all of the reprogramming that would have to be done. It's like the answers are right in everybody's face, but nobody wants to think about what logically makes sense. It's only about, hey, this is what I want, and I don't care if it makes sense at all. And that's weird for me to say, since I'm, the game idea guy, and I kind of run tangents on game ideas, but I don't ever jump out of the scope of what is realistic. Okay, maybe I do sometimes, but not often. So if I'm saying, hey, this isn't in the scope of being realistic, no matter how much you just want it, or the people that were making the comparisons to Final Fantasy VII Remake for Xenoblade Chronicles X. Not X, for 3. Just because it's on the PS5 does not mean that their art style is going to change. Otherwise, Persona would not be on PS5. Because Atlas wouldn't be going through all the work to try to make freaking Persona look like Final Fantasy Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake, I mean. And people need to stop making those types of assumptions. It's just stupid. The art style is the art style. They went with that art style for a reason. They would not be changing the art style to suit your fanboyism. That's like saying that if Wind Waker HD got ported to the PS5 somehow, then they would use a realistic looking Link or a realistic looking character models and set pieces. It'd be stupid. One, because that's not the look that fits the personality of the game. Two, that's not what they wanted to do in the first place. That's why they went looking the route that they did and did a more cel-shaded look. So it shouldn't be hard to understand that the thing that you're thinking is not going to happen. Again, it's like people wholeheartedly ignore the stuff that's right in front of them that makes decent logical sense. So they can overblow what they're saying onto something else. It just doesn't work at all. And that way of thinking does not get them what they want anyway, so you would think that they would stop for a moment and be like, hold on. Let me sit back and actually think this through the right way. But nobody's doing that, and everybody's too busy keeping their heads up their behinds to actually sit down and logically think it. Now, I don't know when Keith said this, that he was not considering all of the development time and resources that would have to go into the game, and how hard and long it would take for them to update all of those assets. Because that's one thing that they would have to do. Either way, no matter which platform they put it on, if they were to go to Sony. Which, being a betting man, Nintendo, if they were going to have Monolith Soft redo it, they would have them do PS4 because that is the bigger market share. So, with that being considered, they would still have to update the game drastically to move it over to PS4. That's reworking all of the code, reworking the graphics to fit how the PlayStation processes things, PS4 processes things, and then on top of that, having it still capable of working with the PS5, so that's even more work. So you gotta consider what you're asking for and what you're saying. And I think that when he put that out there and he got the response he got, he thought that everyone who was responding was worried about being a fanboy. And then a lot of the people that responded to him that may have agreed with him were also thinking that. No, there are just some people who are like, well, that's not how coding works. Just because something works one place doesn't mean I can use it another. That's why, say for instance, if you want to have a program that works on Windows and works on Linux, you have to have different versions. And then depending on which version of Linux you have to have a version made specifically for that. As well as the different versions of Windows. Or, hey, iOS. Nobody's thinking about that. Just like there are some people who say you could port Xenoblade Chronicles 3 right over to a phone. You know what? Yeah, you could do it in theory. It'd be a lot of work. It'd be a lot of struggle getting that game running, but it could be done. But then you have to consider all of the different versions of Android, as well as having it work well for iOS. And potentially, if there is another version there's another phone OS that comes out, yeah, you've got to consider that stuff. And if you can't get your stuff working, it's going to bite you in the long run. It's going to come back and haunt you, because then you're not serving the market properly. And it costs money. A lot of money. So when you have a game that, is already expensive for a company to make, or expensive in their eyes to make, because I can tell you, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is not one of the cheaper games that was developed under Nintendo's watch. Especially with how big the world is said to be. There's no way that game was cheap for them to make. And Monolith Soft are masters at the craft of making large worlds at this point. For them to do a good job, they will have to take everything into consideration when they redevelop, if they were to redevelop for a different platform. And again, it may just not be worth the money for all of the wishing people would do. It may just not be worth the money for them as a company to push it. So even if you believe that the Switch's hardware, which the game was built around, is holding the game back, that doesn't mean that they agree with you and would be willing to do the port work. I'm saying if you can't fund it, it ain't gonna happen. That's the end all be all to it. Whether you agree with me or not, whether you agree with Nintendo or not, whether you agree with Monolith Soft or not, whether you agree with Keith or not, or you agree with anybody that agrees with Keith. That's not how it works. That's the simple fact. I can't just make an app for Android and then go ahead and port it over to iPhone and it still work right. It just does not work. You, again, have to consider every avenue as to how that coding works. You have to consider all of that before you can just say, oh yeah, I'm just going to put this over there. Because these environments, these systems, these OSs, they operate differently. They work differently. And if you don't come to the grasp of that, then what you're asking for, what you're wishing for, what you're hoping for will never happen. When I make my videos about games being ported to different platforms, I'm considering all of that. I'm not considering that I just want the game on there and I don't care how it has to be done. I am considering that, hey, there's a lot of work that's going to go into this. I am considering that potentially, even for as much as I want it to happen, or I think it should happen, the companies themselves that are the proprietors of these games may not feel the same way. That's what you have to consider as a fan, as somebody who enjoys it. You've got to consider that. And for all of the belly aching that people did for something like, No More Heroes 3, the Switch version of that game is still the best-selling version of it. Even if somebody wants to consider the other versions of those games to be superior. Just keep that in mind. But all of that said, I think I have done enough to over-explain this as much as I could. So if anybody has anything they'd like to say, any comments that they'd like to make, please do. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for listening in. Keep your eyes and ears out for more stuff from me. And until the next time, enjoy your games. Peace out, everybody.